Welcome to episode 3 of the Beyond Languages Reach podcast. Hi, my name is Gaines, and I am a writer of fiction who is addicted to music, and this is my podcast. In each episode, I will be reading a piece of prose that I have written, and then playing a bit of music inspired by that prose. This is my way of combining my interests of music and writing. So welcome to the Beyond Languages Reach podcast. Today I'm going to be reading a section of something that has not been published anywhere, not even on my blog. This is a part of the beginning of a novel that I have been working on slowly. I wrote a big chunk of it a while back and recently have gotten back into it. Excuse me. And so it's a bit of a fantasy. And one of the characters is named Arvolin. This section is about him. The novel is going to be called Timbre, by the way. Arvolin spat and swore again. The trouble with parrots was that once the sun went down, you had to fight to keep the things moving. They otherwise had more stamina than any animal, however. And even at night, riding one was still much faster than footing it. So he just wiped his brow and resumed his barrage of kicks and insults at the stubborn creature. He hadn't had a sound sleep in days. There was still plenty of food in his bag, and the parrot naturally never failed to find fresh water, but the hard ride was beginning to wear Arvolin down. His usually brown mop of hair had flattened to an oily black, and his cheeks and chin were now a shadowy mass of dirt and stubble. Neither moon nor stars were out tonight. What little light the clouds did let through, the dense canopy held hostage from the thirsty gloom below. The odd thing about this stretch of woods was how absolutely quiet it was. In most wilderness forests he had visited, the constant cries and rustlings from myriad animals and plants tended to weave a soft but never-ending tapestry of background noise. But not so here. Something was off, and had been for the past several dal. He kept his ears and eyes open. The terrain was rugged. Steep hills and ravines had eroded to reveal slabs of flinty rock and the knobby roots of the ubiquitous scrunch pines. The farther south he had come, the colder the air had grown, until he had begun to glimpse patches of rigid ice crystals standing among the dead pine needles in sheltered crevices along the southern slopes. There was no wind, yet still Arvolin fell to shivering. The parrot's pod-shaped body lurched left without warning, and he tugged hard on the vines that grew from the thing's nose to goad it back. Its 4 fibrous legs tensed, and pesky tendrils began to snake out from its feet, aiming to anchor securely in the soil. The man cursed and yanked hard on the vines over and over until the mount paused, apparently trying to decide whether to give up or to go for broke this time. After a few more kicks and curses, the tendrils withdrew back into the parrot's feet, and reluctantly the beast resumed its plodding in the direction of its master's preference, southward again. It was getting late. By the easing of the slope, he guessed he had finally descended almost to the valley floor. Good. He would be glad to get out of these hills and onto a proper road. Something snapped behind him to the right, several dozen ven up the slope. He turned, peering through the black, but could see nothing beyond the most immediate tree trunks and boulders. There it was again, that snapping noise. Something was back there. More than one something, in fact, or someone. Arvolin flicked his wrists, sending waves down the steering vines in a movement that meant go faster. The pamat quickened its pace a touch, but after trotting over only a few ven, the obstinate thing slowed right back down. Damn idiot plant. I swear I'm going to cut your legs off and shove you in a pot as soon as we get to Vadim's cabin, he muttered, glancing again over his right shoulder. All he could see was darkness between the trees, but the sounds were growing louder behind him. Bolder, maybe. Definitely closer. Whoever they were that were apparently coming down the slope after him, accelerating. Now he could discern that sounds were coming from high above the ground. Bark being scuffed, twigs snapping, like the somethings were coming through the canopy. Not a good sign. Not human, likely, but there were worse things than humans in these parts. Again he tried to get the pamat to go faster, to no avail. They still had more than half a dal to go to get to the bottom of the slope. He had no reason to assume there would be a clearing there, so he closed his eyes and examined his options. They were laid out in his mind like cards. The things making snapping noises in the branches behind him were getting closer. They would be upon him soon. If they were what he feared they were, if the rumors were true about these parts, then these things would not give up. He could convince the pamat to go faster, but only with great mental effort could he sustain that communication, and he had no way of knowing how far the creatures would chase him. If he exhausted himself, he would be easy prey. He would have to fight. Arvolin scanned the forest for ideal ground on which to make his stand, but all he saw in all directions were more boulders and tree trunks fading into the misty dark. He flicked the pamat's vines repeatedly, milking every ounce of speed he could from his mount, but the brief obstinate bursts only brought him to more of the same terrain. So be it, he thought, abruptly pulling back on the vines. As if waiting for this command, the pamat stopped in its tracks and began to sink its tendrils into the earth immediately, shivering with gratitude. The man leapt from his seat in its pod-shaped back, drew his blade, and faced his pursuers. A short minute later, another noise became audible, accompanying the ever-closer snapping of twigs and branches. It sounded like several people whispering to each other all at once. But the voices were low and too harsh to be human. Arvolin's palms were sweating. He shook his head incredulously. But it didn't matter. This wasn't the time to wonder how a group of Uriat could possibly be here, in these woods, so many dals south of their normal habitat. Nor did he have time to fathom why they might be hunting him. An adult human being, and in a pack no less. All that mattered was that they were here, now, almost upon him. He closed his eyes and prepared his defenses, quickly creating a place of silence within his mind. He wrapped himself in it. They were quick. The first one crashed through the branches overhead, clinging with spider legs to the trunk of the pine, then scurried down to dangle its brain-like head just an arm's length above Arvolin's face. Tiny mouths opened, and the Uriat whispered at him, softly, seductively, constantly. Then 3 more Uriat appeared in the treetops above, and like their fellow, they dropped gracefully down the trunks and hung suspended, black legs swaying, their many mouths uttering impossible syllables, 50 at a time, lurching closer and closer to Arvolin. Venom dripped from sharp fangs to patter across the pine needles on the ground. The air was silky with their whispers and the scent of iodine and sap. The man kneeled down on both knees with his eyes closed. Turning his face up to the first Uriat, he began to sing. The sound rose from his throat, strong and pure and focused, until it had achieved a harmonic within itself. Veins bunched from his neck as he aimed the note directly at the creature's head. With his mind's eye, he could see the Uriat pause in confusion for a moment before turning to its nearest companion, whereupon it launched itself at it in a vicious rage. Caught off guard by the attack by its fellow, the other Uriat lost its hold on the tree trunk. Both creatures crashed to the ground in a hissing tangle of spit and legs. Arvolin jumped out of the way, singing even more loudly now, and slashed at the remaining 2 Uriat with his sword. He sliced one of them across the top of its wrinkled face, but the other dodged and struck at his exposed shoulder. Arvolin's song turned into a scream of pain as the acid venom raked into his muscle. He kicked out at the thing with his boot. The moment his singing stopped, the Uriat he had controlled came to and pulled itself up from the oozing ruin that was the companion it had murdered. Arvolin jabbed his blade at the face of the one he had just kicked, but it dodged again. Now the one he had slashed was recovering, staggering toward him on shifty spider legs. Putting one knee to the ground, Arvolin closed his eyes once more and sang a new note. This time his call was even more pure and steady. The beautiful note drew from all his strength, welling up from his chest, and struck at the 3 remaining Uriat all at once. At first they flinched. Then, turning slowly, they began to whisper at one another, their weeping, contorted faces drawing ever closer to each other, the sultry sounds from their mouths growing more intense, more sickeningly seductive. Arvolin scrambled out of the way as the creatures tackled each other and tore and raked with their legs. He couldn't keep the note up for long. Already he was beginning to feel spent. His voice cracked and the spell was broken. But another of the Uriat was dead, and one of the others had lost too many legs to be very mobile. That left just one to contend with. It came at him, faking left and right as it closed in, the whispers of the thing chipping relentlessly away at Arvolin's internal silence. Soon they would tear through his defenses completely, and the Uriat would control his mind. And then he would be lost. He made himself wait the split second it took for the thing to get in range. He could hear the other Uriat, the injured one, dragging itself toward him through the pine needles, its own weakened whispers growing in strength. He felt cold, humid breath. The uninjured one was now less than a ven from his face. With what strength he had left, Arvolin called again. At first, the feeble note warbled forth like a child crying, but it was loud enough to cause the Uriat to shrink back momentarily, and in that instant, the man struck. The point of his blade skewered the creatures just below one of its mouths, silencing the whispering abruptly. It fell back, gurgling as it crumpled to the ground. He hacked at it again and again, this time bringing the full weight of his body with the blade. The Uriat was dead. Gasping for breath, he reeled over to where the one remaining Uriat was whispering at him miserably, still trying desperately, despite its injury, to get into Arvolin's head so that he would just lie down and let it eat him. Arvolin thrust his now slimy blade downward through its skull, silencing it before its whispers could convince him to do otherwise. The Pamat was still standing where it had stopped, feet rooted to the ground, sucking nutrients, completely oblivious. The man dragged himself over to it, climbed on top, and plopped himself into the pod, too exhausted to think. It was all he could do to cock his ear for one long, strained minute to make sure no others were approaching. Satisfied, he shut his eyes, and within seconds he had fallen far, far from consciousness. And there we go. That is a section out of my upcoming novel, Timbre. There are multiple characters. Arvolin is just one of them. This is going to be the first novel, first long story of any sort I've written with more than one character's point of view. So stay tuned. It won't be the next novel to come out, but it will be coming out. Anyway, thank you for listening. I'm now going to play some music. I'm going to improvise something inspired by that piece. So while I play, I'm going to try and get inside Arvolin's head, or just picture the misty night and the boulders and the pine trees around, and the Uriat closing in on him, and the stubborn Pamat sucking nutrients from the soil from the side, just sitting there, obstinate and oblivious. Arvolin. So that is another something I wrote a while back, but I did edit it this morning, so it's a bit more recent. Next time I hope to read something a bit more recent. Anyway, thank you for joining me. This has been episode 3 of the Beyond Languages Reach podcast. And yes, Aria, I know you're hungry. You're always hungry. Poor pussycat, starving to death. So you'll notice a pattern in some of my writing lately. I've been exploring ideas of sound as more than just vibrations we hear. I recently published a short bit on my website, in my blog, called Busk, and that also explores that idea a little bit. Feel free to head over to my website, www.otherspectre.com. On the first page of the blog, you'll find entries from 2025, and if you go back a couple of months, you'll find something, or maybe a few months, you'll find an entry called Busk. Yeah, that's the beginning of another story, which I've been working on, separate to Timbre, yeah, and set in a different world, but exploring some similar ideas. Definitely very much fantasy. Anyway, thank you for joining me for this episode, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.